It's the four-letter word of education, one that can simultaneously give life and evidence to a district's goals and accomplishments, yet at the same time create an uneasy feeling of constant critique and evaluation. That's right, data. But what might a district look like when everyone from the students, families, teachers, and leaders shift that mindset from thinking about data as a four-letter word to looking at data as the most powerful lever to shift culture and learning? Today, I speak with Dr. Lisa Marie Spindler of the Newburgh Enlarged City School District in New York about how Newburgh has grappled with this question for the past year. Welcome to the Pondering Possibilities series with Education Elements. I'm Gabby Hewitt. Today, we're talking all about responsive data cultures in school districts, and I am so excited to be joined by Dr. Lisa Marie Spindler. Lisa Marie is the Assistant Superintendent of Finance for the Newburgh Enlarged City School District in New York and has previously been a principal and an assistant superintendent for curriculum and instruction in the district. We are excited to discuss the possibilities provided by leveraging a data-informed culture to promote more equitable decision-making. Lisa Marie, we're so glad to have you here. Would you mind sharing a little bit more about yourself and Newburgh?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me today to have a discussion with you and something that's been really important for the district. We are embarking on a data-driven dialogue cycle. So we really want to make sure that we're infusing data in the culture in our district, and excited to partner with educational elements to make that happen.
Lisa Marie, thanks so much for sharing that. We have been so fortunate to partner with your district on all sorts of implementation plans. And you and I think, were the first partners in any of the projects that we did in Newburgh. We started out with school redesign. We've done strategic planning with you all. But our most recent partnership over the last 8 months has been in implementing components of a responsive data culture. And I think our listeners could really learn a lot from your experience and what you think it might take to get started on this path. To start us off, could you tell me a little bit about Newburgh before you started to engage in data culture work? What were some indicators that there was something that needed to be done or something that you wanted to shift or change when it came to the district's data culture?
As any district leader, you want to be able to utilize the data. What is the data showing us? What we're doing, is it actually working? And we've created over time protocols with our building leaders, protocols for us as senior staff, and we started to develop cadences, which is called our data comm, which allows principals to highlight their school buildings' goals and represent data of their school to see, are they actually meeting their goal? So although we had this cadence in place and we felt very confident and comfortable with it, we do start to recognize that people were using different strategies in order to present their data. We were finding it difficult for people to find the data, right? Where do we go to it? Where is that resource? It's taking us a lot of times for people to find what we need in order to analyze and assess. And then we also weren't necessarily seeing it move past the principal into the building, into smaller learning groups, smaller professional learning groups in the data. So those three particular areas, we realized how do we create a repertoire or a repository, of where this data is housed. We try to give professional development on state level websites and level 1 and how they can access it. We attempted creating a data dashboard. We disseminate our state information, as soon as it's readily and available. Yet there isn't this one go-to place, right? So definitely, where are we storing it? Where are we housing it? Why does it look different? We have, among all of our different buildings and different grade levels, even though our cadence was pretty similar. And when we go to school buildings, are there enough conversations among the teachers and the students in regards to the data? We realized that in order for it to become second nature, to become built in our culture, we needed to regroup. We needed to redesign what data culture looks like and feels like in Newburgh.
So it sounded like, Lisa Marie, the investment was there, right? The district had already identified that data is, and the use of data is, critical and really aligned to the strategic priorities of the district. You all had practices like your data comm. You had a regular cadence for looking at data, but there was some alignment in where that data was housed. There was some misalignment in sort of the strategies that leaders were using. And it also sounds like the real, end user of who's going to be most impacted by data use were the students. And you didn't quite see the scaling of that data strategy, the data use really reaching that classroom level. It sounds like that was a tension, right? This misalignment and potentially wanting to really make sure that there is a district perspective on what strategies would be highest impact. So what did you hope to accomplish by being more purposeful around your district's relationship with data?
First off, we wanted to make sure that this wasn't just another initiative for our district. We didn't want people to say, oh, this is something that's going to come and go. And we wanted them to really have a good foundational understanding that data should be utilized for many of our decision makings, that we wanted to know that it was going to be sustainable. In designing this new initiative, we had to also be empathetic to those end users that you described earlier, right? To our teachers. We had to make sure, and we're still going to continue making sure, that this isn't punitive in nature. And so how do we shift that culture, right? How do you shift the mindset of they just want to know how we're doing because they want to, shame us, or they want to say what we're not doing right? And how do we, that's a big part of shifting the culture, that's not the reason why we're doing this. That's not our intention. And we have to be really intentional about making sure that that's not our intention.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to what you said earlier about the misalignment, right? From a district perspective, data is this really, really powerful tool that can transform a student experience, but sometimes it can feel like it's just used for evaluative or, like you said, punitive purposes. And so for our listeners, would love to hear if you can walk us back to November 2020 when we really kicked off this work. Can you describe how, you began the data culture work? What was really exciting for you at that time? And what was something that you might have been more nervous or apprehensive about?
I'm excited about the word data. I think a lot of other people get nervous about the word data because they think numbers, or they think that they can't do it. So I was excited to work on a project on something that I'm passionate about, right? And to have other people who are apprehensive with data to actually be passionate about data too. And the apprehension, as I spoke about earlier, is getting people to understand that it's not punitive. You can do this. You will like it. It will be great work. You can use it for great things. I think a lot of times we don't realize that we use data in other ways in life. So for example, I'm a mother of two, and when I go to the pediatrician, I want to know the norm reference, right? I want to know, is my child above or below the percentile for weight and height and head circumference and all of that, right? That's data that we're using to compare. And it doesn't mean that I'm going to love my child any less. It just means that maybe, I might have to change a diet plan for my child, or I might have to pay attention to certain nutrients that he or she might need and things of that nature. So how do we then try to take school, where scores or numbers, right, from early childhood, if you're failing something or not doing well, is seen as you're not doing your job, you're not good, it's bad, right? How do you make a shift in that thinking?
I love that. As a mama to myself, I love that comparison. And so you sort of said this idea of norm referencing, which I really like. And I think that's probably important to think about what your baseline is. What does your district currently believe to be true about data? And how do you sort of shift that baseline in the direction that aligns to your vision? And we are 8 months into this now. And so, we're at this sort of transitional point where we're thinking about a new school year, and we're moving into rolling this data culture framework to your administrators now, right? We started with a small group of different stakeholders that you mentioned. And I know something that's top of mind for you all is, how do you bring in your entire leadership across the district into this? We're also thinking about year 2 of your work with education elements around data culture. And so as you're sort of at this pivot point, Lisa Marie, would just love to hear, what do you think has gone really well so far? What changes do you feel like you've seen in the district already? And what do you think is the work that is yet to be done?
What we recognized very early in the planning with educational elements, you designed us to have different teams, right? We're named the Vanguard team. So in essence, right, it gives you a sense of responsibility, a sense of power, a sense of ownership, just by the fact that you're part of this Vanguard team, which will then be the accountability officers of whether the work is going to be done. It's not just one person. It's not just the deputy or the assistant superintendent or even the superintendent saying, we must have a data culture, right? That's not going to be embedded in the district if you're having one person spearhead it. And it's a large project, right? So we're a district of 11,000 students, 14 schools, thousands of teachers and employees. So how do you scale something of this sort to that many people down to, like we said, to the student and to the parents? So the fact that the first step with educational elements was you need to have multiple design teams and then someone who's going to come back and give feedback on the steps of the process. That was really, really important structure that was brought to us by educational elements that I definitely value. We also saw that we didn't want it to just be one, where you're going to have one professional development and we're going to expect you to take this and move forward with it, right? We said this is a 3-year planning before we, kind of release it. And it's a slow release process. So as you said, that small group is now going to become a turnkey to a larger group, but we're also in planning stages of creating a guidebook or what we call a playbook, a play-by-play. So you have a resource to go to, but the playbook is also creating those consistencies because as we talked about earlier, we noticed that it wasn't consistent across the district. The protocols weren't quite where we needed them to be. And we also needed to have a protocol that was going to allow more engagement and more talking about data.
I really love that. And I especially love that when you were talking about the playbook, that last word you used was not just implemented, but also refined. A word that we haven't said yet is when we think about a data culture, we actually define that as a responsive data culture whenever we're asking schools to be really agile, especially in a post-pandemic year. And the use of that word responsive is, we're not just a bunch of senior level district leaders who are creating this playbook. We're actually creating drafts of it. We're asking for input from the Vanguard that does include teachers. It does include Vanguard advisors that are students. And we're using sort of that feedback to refine the playbook. And so I really appreciate that you named for, the leaders listening to this, that it is an iterative refining type of process. And so if we're talking to district leaders, or if you had to give advice to a district who is ready to engage in data culture work, what would you tell them? What's something that you would think is key as they're thinking about starting this themselves?
I think what's key is to identify what you are doing well with the data. I'm sure there's pockets of really great bright spots in your district. And your district will look very different than ours, right? You may be at different places with priorities and initiatives. So take the opportunity to kind of brainstorm, like, what are we doing really well around data? And where would we like to be with data? I think educational elements did a wonderful job in helping us create a continuum for our district about where we aspire to be. What's great about educational elements is you design your work with them to tailor to your needs. Get input. The empathy interviews that we did prior to the work guided our work, right? So you want to hear from your stakeholders what they think about data, where they think they are, where they think they can grow. And because educational elements is asking the questions, you're really going to get candid feedback.
Well, Lisa Marie, I love that, because I think my final question to you was going to be, what are the top 3 things a district should focus on if they want to begin creating a responsive data culture? And I feel like you just named that for us, right? One thing is making sure that we're aligned on the vision. You mentioned where you are, where you want to go, right? So I think having that visioning portion to start with is so critical. The second piece you mentioned was really this idea of taking stock of your current state. And we really think about that as an inventory, right? So we can't actually create a roadmap for how we get to that vision if we don't actually know our starting point. And really the third thing, and probably what I think we would both say is one of the most important, is getting input from different stakeholders. And so you named that we started with some empathy interviews. We talked to a bunch of different stakeholders in the district, teachers, staff members, counselors, students, district leaders, to really understand what were the mindsets, the beliefs, and really sort of the current strategies around data. And so I just want to thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure talking with you and hearing from your experience. If our listeners want to find out more about you or what Newburgh's currently doing, where can they go to find out more?
Sure. At Newburgh Schools for our Twitter and our Instagram, and facebook.com/Newburgh Schools to learn more about our work and our district.
Thank you, Lisa Marie. And speaking of learning more, you can find out even more about our approach to data culture by clicking into the resources in the show notes. There, you'll find lots of information, including a step-by-step guide to the essential elements of a responsive data culture and a video that actually profiles Newburgh's journey in this first year of implementing their own responsive data culture. That's all the time we have for now. Be sure to check out our other episodes in this series to learn more about how Education Elements has been working with districts across the country to create more equitable, responsive, and student-centered organizations, teams, and classrooms. Take care, be well, and happy learning.